Let's go to our expert real quick. Attorney Michael Barnes, drug policy advisor. Michael, what'd you think of the defense's theory there of, going along with Murray, the lorazepam, excuse me, at 2 and 5, and then Michael grabs the 8 to 10 tablets at 7 in the morning?
Well, they're doing a good job at confusing people if that's their intent, because this is all quite different from what the attorneys for Conrad Murray have said at previous times. At the opening statement, we heard that there were 8 2-milligram pills, and now we heard about a week ago that there was a total of 8 milligrams, and now we're hearing that's 20. Who knows? It's a mess.
Got it. Okay, let's get back to court.
Indicating what would happen.
Here it is, the Great Seal of the State of California. Meeting time for the, as you heard, morning break in Los Angeles gives us a chance to really dig out the nuggets here that could help decide this case, because it's in large part a science case. And the levels of propofol, lorazepam, in Michael Jackson's blood. We have our experts to do just that. And as always, go to HLNTV.com/Michael Jackson. You can look at yourself some of the intricate detail, evidence, testimony, i.e. Michael Jackson's medical records from Dr. Klein's office there to be looked at. Also, propofol lollipops. You can read up on that as well. Meantime, let's go to our experts. Go back to Michael Barnes, drug policy advisor and an attorney. All right, Michael, right there before the break, we get Dr. Paul White, defense's propofol drug expert, will say, telling us why, hey, that's right. Even to see a little bit of lorazepam in his stomach tells us then he probably did take it orally at some point. So he's trying to make that point for the defense.
He is, and he made it well. That's one of the first points today that to me has made sense, and that actually could be beneficial to the defense's theory. But I don't think that it makes a big difference when you look at the big picture. You said, Mike, that this is going to be a science case. That is going to be true if the defense is successful and is able to narrow these issues in this case down to these questions of whether it's 333rd of a pill in the stomach. But in reality, we've heard from the three experts on the prosecution side, that this is really about 17 or more standard deviations from medical care that ultimately all had the effect of leading to Michael Jackson's death. And so we are really falling into the hands of the defense theory if we make it about a science case.
That's interesting. Well, let's listen to it. I believe we have it ready to go, and it just happened moments ago, literally, as you hear Paul White. And to your point, Michael, and I agree with you, it was a concise way to put it, and it was persuasive, and it has us talking in those terms that the defense wants us talking in. So let's listen.
The important point is you would not expect to see any free lorazepam in the stomach because it is completely absorbed. Unless, I mean, you would not expect to see any free lorazepam in the stomach if it was only given intravenously. That's my point, because there's no what they call post-mortem redistribution, which means a drug going from the bloodstream into the stomach. So the fact that there is even a tiny amount of free lorazepam is consistent with the theory that he took lorazepam orally.
Okay, strong point for the defense, and very wisely, Mr. Flanagan said, okay, good time for a break. So let the jury chew on that a little bit. But then, Michael, I know you're going to go back to the defense and say, you know what? Michael Jackson left the room after he was given propofol by Dr. Murray, right? Because that's where the prosecution always wants to go.
Yes, and we also have to go back to the prior expert from yesterday. Dr. Waldman said that when you're dealing with any controlled substance in any situation, not even if there's someone who's either addicted or dependent or drug-seeking in this scenario, but anytime you're dealing with a controlled substance, you lock that medication in a cabinet or in some sort of safe to prevent anyone, not just a drug seeker, anyone from getting his or her hands on it.
Yep. Locked away in a cabinet, where I believe his exact words and exact example. We're going to continue as they continue their morning break, breaking down some of the big moments here. This is the defense's big witness, Dr. Paul White. Is he scoring for them? We'll talk about it. More coming up. You're watching HLN. As we get closer to a verdict, again, defense on their final witness, we believe, unless there's a surprise here, Dr. Paul White. Michael Barnes, real quick, you feel that change? I mean,
Yes.
we're getting close to a verdict, and you can sense it in and outside of court, don't you think?
Definitely so. And there's a point that I want to make about the defense's tactic, because I think it's smart on the defense's part. They're doing what in law school we learn is called begging the question, or it's like creating a circular argument. With these charts that Dr. Paul White is showing now, he is assuming that Dr. Paul Schaefer had created his charts to show something real, but he didn't. Schaefer did something that was hypothetical, and they're misconstruing it now as real, and that's going to be problematic, I think, if the jurors figure it out.
Right. And we knew this was coming, that you got to cut at Schaefer one way or another. If not personally, you got to go with his science for sure, because that's what the prosecution's basing their theories off of. Well, much more coming up. Keep it right here. You're watching from the defense. Here's how, and here is the theory in a nutshell, and we'll let you listen to it. By the way, our experts, Michael Barnes, attorney, drug policy advisor, also with us, Eric Chase, an attorney. And Eric, let's listen. Here's the theory from the defense. And they're going off Murray's story that he gave Michael Jackson lorazepam at 2 in the morning, 5 in the morning, but then they add in that Michael must have had 8 to 10 tablets of lorazepam, and that's how you get to the blood level of lorazepam at time of death. We'll listen to that and get your take on it coming out.
The possibility that Mr. Jackson actually took pills orally, which he had available and had used in the past. The simulation shows 20 milligrams, which is equivalent of 10 2-milligram pills or 5 4-milligram pills taken at the same time at about 7 a.m., presumably with liquid, and achieving a peak level in the blood about 1 to 2 hours, typically 2 hours after oral administration, and then the subsequent decline in the blood concentration.
Policy advisor and an attorney, do you find that theory that was just forwarded, that we heard in court moments ago, plausible? Does it institute and introduce reasonable doubt?
I think if the jurors are not paying close attention, and if the prosecution does not do a really good job at the cross-examination of Dr. Paul White, it could be harmful to the case of the prosecution and beneficial to the defense. Because, again, these models that are coming out now from the defense are misconstruing the models that the prosecution witness, Dr. Schaefer, put forth. And so if there's the assumption that those models from Dr. Schaefer were intended to be legitimate estimates of what actually occurred, then yes, the defense is going to be successful, or could be successful, with its present argument. But if the jury actually realizes that the purpose of Dr. Schaefer's models was actually to prove that Conrad Murray's testimony was inaccurate and that things did not go down in the way that the defense is now assuming as it puts forth its models, then I think it's all going to work out in favor of the prosecution.
Okay, and still to come, don't forget, we're going to get, I'm sure, models of the propofol in Michael Jackson's blood. That's sure to come as well. Again, morning break in Los Angeles. You're not going to miss a moment of testimony. Michael Jackson self-injected propofol between 11:30 and 12 o'clock. Big question, does this change the trial? Is this a game changer? Is this the big day the defense was looking for? Let's get our experts weighing in on that. We have Michael Barnes, attorney, drug policy advisor, also with us, attorney Eric Chase. Michael, first to you. I mean, Paul White was good. I mean, he was very knowledgeable. He did, especially in those key spots, that he was very clear to the jury. Is this a game change in your mind?
Paul White was much more credible than I had anticipated before yesterday. But I actually think that, stepping back, there's not enough detail in what the defense has put forth for there to be a reasonable alternative to the entire very detailed story that we got from the prosecution. There are so many questions left. They didn't expressly state that Conrad Murray was gone for more than 2 minutes to allow Michael Jackson to self-infuse. They didn't explain how he was able to do so with the connection to the IV through the leg, where he got the propofol, how he was able to pull it out, because we've heard from all the experts who've dealt with propofol that it's hard to pull out of the bottle, and then where did he inject it? Just a lot of questions still remaining. And then there's also still the testimony by 2 other experts for the prosecution and 1 for the defense, which are completely inconsistent with what we've seen from Conrad Murray and heard from this other expert.
Got it. All right. Eric Chase, let's go to you on this. As the jury now, a lot to think about as they get the defense theory right before a weekend break, and we'll resume with cross-examination on Monday. Game change to you, Eric?
Well, it's actually the game the defense set up right from the opening statement when they told the jury that Michael Jackson had self-administered the drugs that killed him. But what I think the jury is going to be doing is waiting for the cross-examination. Just like we saw with Dr. Schaefer, it's very easy for experts to put forth their story when they're being questioned by their guy, their friendly attorney on direct examination. It's how Dr. White holds up on cross-examination that's going to make a difference. And I want to address something that Mr. Barnes said about the holes and the things that Dr. White didn't address. What the defense is trying to do here is real simple. They're trying to frame the question. The prosecution has laid out this elaborate story and chain of events. They only need to break one link in that chain to create reasonable doubt and have Dr. Murray acquitted. They've ignored the other links because they can't, frankly, win on it. Dr. Murray was not the perfect physician, obviously, in the way he was treating Michael Jackson. But if the story that the prosecution is using to try and convict Dr. Murray falls apart in even one important respect, in this case, the direct infusion set up by Dr. Murray, the defense can win this thing.
Michael, to that point, and we've talked about it a lot, that's been big all along. The prosecution needs propofol in that bag. They need an IV setup. How do you go about now, if you're David Walgren, Deborah Brazil, to get that bottle back in the bag and to prove, yes, the bag was milky and their client is guilty?
I think the cross-examination is, of course, going to be key, and I will be eager to see how then we also might hear again from Dr. Schaefer what he's able to do to pick apart the story of Dr. White. But I haven't agreed all along that you have to get that bottle in the bag or that there had to be dose and drip, because I actually think that if you step back and look at the elements of this crime, really, negligence in this case, when you're dealing with a physician who has an extra duty of care, especially with someone who might show drug-seeking behaviors, he doesn't follow those standards of care as set forth a reasonably prudent physician would follow, the death occurs. You've got all the elements of involuntary manslaughter, and then you've also got all the factual additional 16 defenses that needed to be set forth, and we didn't get any of those. So I think your bigger picture, the defense is not in a strong position. I mean, they've got an indefensible client, in my opinion.
Right. You're right. I mean, 17 egregious violations, 4 of which unconscionable. And I know what you're saying, and the hope of the prosecution is that jury takes a step back after a couple of pretty good days for the defense. Let's listen to a little bit again. Pivotal testimony. It's Dr. Paul White. Let's listen, and we'll get our experts to weigh in.
These are 100 milligrams each. These are self-injections by Michael Jackson. Now, is this scenario that Dr. Schaefer came up with, would you just describe this as just plain ludicrous?
Again, we've talked earlier about the difficulty in drawing up even 5 cc's. To have a patient who's somewhat sedated under the effects of drugs, drawing up at one time, it may be conceivable. Drawing it up 6 times over that period of time, 2 hours, is inconceivable, yes. He would.
Okay, and in the midst of that, he was taking apart some of Dr. Schaefer's scenarios, and he used some pretty strong terminology, calling them ludicrous, absurd, a little less absurd, not rational. Michael, since you're the drug policy advisor, I'll get you real quick on this. Dr. White was fighting back a little bit and trying to undercut his, well, friend, maybe former friend at this point.
Yeah, you know, I think it's disingenuous. I mean, I've already stated during one of the breaks that what we see here is Dr. Paul White trying to poke holes in these graphs that Dr. Schaefer put together to demonstrate that Conrad Murray's story couldn't have worked out the way that he claims it worked, that these scenarios were indeed outrageous and incomprehensible. Now we're seeing that Dr. Paul White's coming back and supposing that Dr. Schaefer put those forth as though they were realistic or that's what really occurred. I'm not surprised that the defense uses this tactic, but I am somewhat surprised that we're seeing Dr. Paul White use this tactic because, frankly, it's ethically questionable.
All right, and there you go. You see the picture. The headline at one point has been War of the Nerds, as we have Dr. Paul White versus Dr. Stephen Schaefer. They've known each other a long time. And Eric Chase, could it come down to that, who the jury believes of these two?
Well, that's exactly what the defense is trying to do. As a defense attorney, we love battle of the expert cases. And you know what word I love from both of their testimony? I love the word model. They've created these models of how this happened with milligrams and liters and drip rates, but it's a model. It's based on assumptions and predictions and, to some extent, educated guesses. And that's the point the defense has to drive home in closing argument, and they've made it plausible through Dr. White that one model is not necessarily better than the other model. Each one is a possible predictor of what happened to Michael Jackson, and if each one is possible, they've got reasonable doubt. And again, Mike, I think they can win this thing.
Wow. And that's what the defense has been hoping for, and that's a great point. You know, really putting it in perspective, if you're a defense attorney, that's what you want. You know, a flip of the coin almost between these two experts. And we know the jury's going a lot further than that, but if they're arguing over the experts, that's good for the defense, and they're not zoned in on Dr. Conrad Murray and what he did in the hours leading up to Michael Jackson's death. That's what the prosecution wants to make this about. All right, some big news from the courtroom and outside the courtroom. Getting you caught up in just